think, as I've mentioned before, I'm a big advocate of moving GST from 10 to 12%. I think that should be moved as a consumption tax.
Generally speaking, the stock market is now 15%.
And I think that there should be more of a focus towards away from income tax adjustments to more taxing on consumption. And I'm a big believer of that. I mean, this adds just under $24 a week to the average income on this tax-free division scheme. And I think that is insignificant because it looks okay when we go to vote. The federal election, I think, from in May, I think that they're divided now. A wise man 6 months ago, I thought they would kick the election down and keep it at May because he hasn't got the votes he thinks he has. I think they may bring it forward to lock in the term. Dutton's going to struggle to get up. It'd be interesting to see who's going to be the better salesman, Dutton or Albanese, between now and November. But if I was Albanese, I think he'll bring the election forward. Getting back to the question about this $24 free kick to the average wage earner is insignificant because the average cost to bring that up to combat the inflationary increase would need to be about 10 times that. That's your problem. Not $24 a week, more like $240. So it doesn't, that's just to me a vote grab for the middle class. And that won't work. So I'm a big believer of GST going to 12, hits the consumption, you can't really move the tax thresholds much lower than where they are because the country just can't afford it. You've only got 15.1 million taxpayers in the country and 25.4 million people that live here. So those ratios don't work. You've got 60% working and 40% that aren't, either at school or retired. So those ratios don't work. I think that you need to hit consumption. I think that's going to be, GST certainly needs to move to 12%, in my opinion, to resolve big issues with the current debt and cash flow. When GST first came out, it was introduced, and the paper was written in 1998, believe it or not, and was rolled out in June 2000, is that it was an extremely difficult tax for anyone in Australia to sort of comprehend what wasn't taxed and what was, or what was GST-able. And I know Howard brought that in, Houston not understanding that, but there were a lot of economists that were trying to get their head around. I don't think even people in the tax office, it was very ambiguous for all business owners. I remember reading the legislation when it first came out, when it was proposed, and I had 20 accountants that I spoke to individually, and they were still scratching their head. But now, obviously that's resolved. It's a good question. The reality is it's still the lowest GST in the world. Out of 195 countries, it's still one of the lowest levels of GST, of consumption tax. Keeping in mind that it replaced a 20% sales tax, and it went to 10. I think moving it to 12%, there could be some concessions there that'd have to be carefully worked through. But for the middle class and the wealthy on consumption, I think 12% GST can be sold. And what was the term they used just recently? It might have been through COVID. We're all in it together. I mean, how that is sold is we are all in it together. And if you're a taxpayer and a patriot, maybe that's the way, that we are all in it together to get our debt back in the black and for this to be a better country, so funding can go to sources where it's needed, not just talk, more in education, not so much in infrastructure and train loops and tunnels and going to Chelsea to Box Hill. Who's interested in that? I think that there's just most of the governments have just been poor managers, and I know a lot of the politicians that have been in Canberra, without mentioning names, but they're financially pretty much illiterate, or they couldn't manage a game of Snap. So I think, I think the GST can be sold, needs to be carefully thought through, but consumption should be, the more you spend, those people should pay. I don't think that the cross-subsidisation to the tax system will work. Well, the government tax, the highest taxed commodity in this country, undoubtedly, has been alcohol, cigarettes and gaming. And when the government saw the revenues, it's interesting, when times are tough, gaming and spending on consumption of alcohol actually increases, more so than it does obviously when things are going well. And they jumped all over that, where the tax rates on consumption of alcohol gaming now ranges anywhere between 35 up to 67%. So, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm against gambling, particularly for young kids. And, well, cigarettes and consumption, I mean, well, that's destructive too. So I think, I'm not opposed to what they've done there, but surely the rates that's between 35 to 67%, we can move our GST from 10 to 12. I mean, the shopping bill or the cost might jump from, if someone's spending $250 a week on groceries, you're talking about a bill that might go up between $3 to $5 per week on GST just on consumption of food. So it's not a lot of money, but it's a far better off to lock that in. But how it's sold, getting back to the question, thinking about it, is there has to be a definitive forecast and an agreement by the voter that there is a certain date and a milestone where our debt is halved. That's the way it should be sold. So, for example, if it's 2024, is that if we move GST, you'd want to be certain. I've run the figures before COVID. I've been rattling on about this for a long time, but you'd want to have certainty that the current debt with the GST alone and no changes eradicated the debt by 40% within 8 years. Before the current debt hitting now 1 trillion, I worked out before COVID that moving GST to 12% would eradicate our national debt in 7 years. Here now, it's 20 times what it was in 2008. So it's a bigger issue, but the sales side, if you could get the commitment from the leading government or the current government and whomever is in power, if Liberals get in November or May, which is a reach, that you gave them a commitment. I mean, they've got a 2030 plan on zero emissions, which is they'll be lucky to meet that target by 2040. They will not meet that target. And the same principles should apply to the national debt. That's how that's sold. That's how I would sell it if I was leading, and I think I'd get the votes.